Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Europe podcast. Good morning. It's Wednesday, the 25th of February. I'm Caroline Hepker in London.
And I'm Stephen Carroll in Brussels. Coming up today, bigger, better, richer and stronger. US President Donald Trump delivers a defiant State of the Union address as his approval ratings slide.
Heavyweight investors and institutions issue stark warnings over private credit's trajectory.
Plus, being shown the door why Spain's broken housing market is pitting owners against squatters.
Let's start with a roundup of our top stories.
The US President Donald Trump has made a strident defence of his economic record at the State of the Union. In a record 1 hour and 47-minute address, the president said inflation was plummeting and the economy was strong. The president used the speech to draw stark contrasts between his administration and that of his predecessor. As well as overstating the inflation rate that he inherited, Trump repeatedly blamed opponents and the establishment for his political troubles. The US president also attacked the Supreme Court's decision to strike down his global tariffs, as half of the justices who ruled against him sat in the audience watching.
Just 4 days ago, an unfortunate ruling from the United States Supreme Court. It just came down. It came down. Very unfortunate ruling. But the good news is that almost all countries and corporations want to keep the deal that they already made, right, Scott? Knowing that the legal power that I, as president, have to make a new deal could be far worse for them.
President Trump's veiled threat comes after both the EU and India paused their US trade deals following the Supreme Court's decision. Trump also suggested his new tariffs would not require approval from Congress. That's despite the newly enacted 10% and potentially up to 15% global levy having a 150-day limit before congressional approval is required to keep it in place.
President Trump also used his address to claim that Iran is working to reconstitute its nuclear program. The accusation comes after a US military strike in June last year that the president had previously said resulted in the obliteration of Iran's key nuclear sites. The US has now amassed a military force in the Middle East not seen since the 2003 Iraq invasion, as speculation grows that President Trump is preparing for a fresh round of strikes in the coming days. He also issued this confrontational warning to the regime in Tehran.
They were warned to make no future attempts to rebuild their weapons program, and in particular, nuclear weapons. Yet they continue starting it all over. We wiped it out and they want to start all over again. And are at this moment again pursuing their sinister ambitions. We are in negotiations with them. They want to make a deal, but we haven't heard those secret words. We will never have a nuclear weapon.
President Trump, Iran has long argued that its nuclear program is for peaceful purposes. Trump's comments now set the stage for a high-stakes meeting in Geneva on Thursday between representatives from the US and Iranian officials, which is aimed at securing a nuclear deal.
HSBC has reported better than expected earnings for 2025. The lender posted pre-tax profit of $29.9 billion for the year. That's as HSBC's market value topped $270 billion for the first time. CEO Georges El-Hedry says the bank will continue to evolve.
We are transforming with precision, with discipline, and we're doing it at pace, and we expect to be able to conclude a number of the actions we set out to do earlier than initially planned.
HSBC's Georges El-Hedry there speaking to Bloomberg this morning. His radical restructuring has won praise from investors and driven the bank's shares up almost 90% since he took the helm. It means the bonus pool at Europe's largest bank is up 10% to $3.93 billion, the highest in at least a decade.
A growing number of industry voices are displaying caution when it comes to private credit. Money manager Danny Moses, featured in The Big Short, says that the private market's push into retail products is reminiscent of the years before the global financial crisis. Strategists at UBS have upped their forecast for defaults in the sector to 15%. That's 2 percentage points more than a forecast less than a month ago. The bank's head of public and private credit strategy, Matthew Mish, says technology and technological progress could also present a challenge for the industry.
We are more concerned with AI disruption and the impact on the loan market in the near to medium term than we are on oversupply from the hyperscalers and potential for supply indigestion. That, in my view, is a medium to longer term concern, or no concern at all, to be candid.
UBS's Matthew Mish speaking there to Bloomberg yesterday. His remarks come as activist investor Boaz Weinstein also warned of a deeper crack in private credit funds. Fears surrounding the sector have been building in recent days after the asset manager Blue Owl Capital blocked investors from making withdrawals from one of its private credit funds, raising anxiety about the loans issued by direct lenders.
European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen says the EU will deliver on its €90 billion aid for Ukraine one way or another. The EU has been repeatedly blocked by Hungary from passing an aid package and further sanctions on Russia. Speaking in Kyiv, marking 4 years of the start of Russia's full-scale invasion, von der Leyen stressed that Ukraine would receive the funding.
The loan was agreed by 27 heads of state and government. They have given their word. This word cannot be broken. So we will deliver on the loan, one way or the other. Let me be very clear, we have different options and we will use them.
European Commission President's words come as Ukraine is set to run out of funding in a matter of weeks. Peace talks with Russia have also stalled, with both sides seemingly prepared for a long war of attrition.
Lawyers acting for Peter Mandelson say that his arrest was prompted by a suggestion that he was about to flee the country. The former UK ambassador to Washington is under investigation for his links to convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. He denies any wrongdoing and has been released on bail. Foreign Secretary Yvette Cooper says it's an unwelcome distraction.
Some of what has been so deeply frustrating about all of this is that really at the heart of all of this should be the victims of Epstein. That really should be the focus.
Cooper's government has come under fire for choosing Mandelson as its top diplomat to the United States. Polling puts Prime Minister Keir Starmer as the most unpopular UK leader in modern times, ahead of key local and regional elections. So those are our top stories then for you this morning. Looking at the markets. So we had something of a relief rally, it would seem. AI strains may be easing. Wall Street rallied on Tuesday. European stocks also ended the day up 0.2%. And this morning you see the MSCI Asia Pacific Index up by 1.5%. South Korea has now surged past France in terms of its stock market valuation. I thought that was notable. Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index is down 0.2%. Treasuries edging lower this morning. 10-year Treasury yields up 1.5 basis points at 4.04. Gold and silver gaining. Gold this morning up 0.8%, and Bitcoin also gaining. So again, bit risk on there. So up by 1.5% for Bitcoin this morning.
In a moment, we will bring you more on President Trump's State of the Union address and what it means for the rest of the world, plus how squatters are being pitted against owners in Spain's housing crisis. But another story that caught our eye this morning on how a number of Donald Trump's ambassadors in Europe are getting themselves into trouble with some undiplomatic comments and actions. Our reporters in Brussels, Warsaw and Paris have been writing about this. Now, we spoke to Bill White, the US ambassador to Belgium, a couple of weeks ago. He's an ardent supporter of President Trump, not shy about it. He's gotten himself into trouble in Belgium after accusing the country of anti-Semitism over a legal investigation into Jewish ritual circumcision in the city of Antwerp, and the investigation is over whether it was being done without proper medical supervision. The ambassador was summoned by Belgium's foreign minister, who accused him of peddling dangerous disinformation that undermines the real fight against hatred. In France, meanwhile, the ambassador also summoned by the foreign ministry and didn't turn up, which prompted the French foreign ministry to cut off his access to all government officials. It's a new diplomatic playbook that seems to be employed by some of Donald Trump's appointees, which don't seem to be doing much to help the US president's reputation abroad.
No, and I think it's quite interesting. It's interesting also to sort of gather what the US is doing in Europe, in all of these different countries, where, you know, whether there are ambassadors or at least the evidence in a number of countries. I mean, if anything, I think it may be also fueling the concern about social media in Europe, which is another really big clash point, fissure line between the EU and the US, because, for example, the French foreign minister, Jean-Noël Barrot, is saying that the government must bring to heel these social networks, take back control control over our public space, because they say that, President Trump's appointees are using this particular tool in such a big way to kind of make their points in Europe.
Yeah, we'll put a link to that story in our podcast show notes, but let's bring you more now on the State of the Union speech in the US. Donald Trump defended his record despite his approval rating sliding in opinion polls. We've got our Washington Deputy Bureau Chief Laura Davison with us for more on this. Laura, good to talk to you. So a record 1 hour and 47 minutes in this address. Will it have helped to turn around public opinion about Trump's presidency?
There's not a lot in this speech that would really help Trump, but he also didn't hurt himself either. This speech really was a rehash, mostly backward-looking, him touting, his first year successes, looking at tax cuts. He talked a lot about, all the foreign policy things he's been involved in between the Board of Peace and Gaza, Israel. But he didn't really have any ideas for the future. There was only, one sort of small idea dealing with retirement accounts that he brought up, but didn't have any big sweeping plans. That does not give Republicans a lot to run on going into the midterms. We talked to Republican allies and members of the party going into the speech, and they were hoping to have a message they could really seize on, sell to voters if this is why you should keep Republicans in Congress, majorities in both chambers as well as the White House. They did not get that tonight.
Yeah, one person described it, I saw, as a pep rally. There was lots of patriotism. It was very bombastic. There were the gold medal winners from the Olympics that were brought in at one point. There was a lot of kind of noise and excitement about it. But as you say, what did we actually learn in terms of policy? And in particular, what we want to understand is trade policy, given the Supreme Court decision last week.
Yes, Trump did mention tariffs. And, this, of course, is just in front of several of the Supreme Court justices who attended the speech in person, including a handful who were sort of Republican-appointed judges who voted against his tariffs. He said, look, I'm going to continue this. Trump has held this view for a long time, that he reiterated that, tariffs are a good negotiating tool, that they bring in revenue to the U.S. and not necessarily that they hurt U.S. businesses or consumers. He said, look, what I'll have to do may be more complex than I was doing previously, but said, perhaps that'll be better going forward. It was interesting. He noted, in the room, this is a speech to Congress. He said, look, Congress, I'm not going to rely on your approval to move forward. So this means that he's going to have to look at all these various pockets of the law that does give him the ability to levy tariffs, but it takes more time. He has to show more justification. And, it's likely that Congress, if he asked them to approve these tariffs, Congress would not do it. So he's going to have to do this go-it-alone approach.
What about the other key foreign policy issues that we're watching for developments on, Iran or the war in Ukraine?
Yeah, he mentioned the war in Ukraine, but really did not have a lot of substantive things to say there, other than noting that there's, mass casualties on both sides and the killing continues. On Iran, he had a little bit more of a pointed message there. He said, that he hopes that diplomacy can work out, noting that there are talks here just in a couple days, but acknowledged that, he would never allow Iran to get a nuclear weapon, and he was not afraid to have the U.S. military intervene. He, mentioned that he claimed that Iran is working on missiles that could reach the U.S. and, seemed to be building a case there that if he needed to use the military, he could point back to some of these comments from tonight.
Okay, very interesting. Thank you so much, Laura, for being with us. That is our Washington Deputy Bureau Chief, Laura Davison, there thinking about the State of the Union address from President Trump.
Stay with us. More from Bloomberg Daybreak Europe coming up after this.
In Spain, an escalating housing crisis has seen tens of thousands of homes occupied by squatters. Some of those properties are now even being listed for sale as the government prepares to decide on extending protections for vulnerable tenants. Our reporter Ainhoa Goyeneche joins us now from Madrid for more. Ainhoa, good morning. Great to talk to you. How big is this problem then of people squatting in homes in Spain, and why has it gotten so bad?
Well, in terms of scale, it still represents a small percentage nationwide, but in some cities, mainly capital, Madrid, Barcelona, it's becoming increasingly highly visible, and it's becoming a social and political problem. For the most part, we're not talking of the classic squatter breaking into an empty property. It's more what we call inquiocupas, so tenants who stop paying rent but remain in the home. And the problem behind it is that just rents have become unaffordable for many. rental burden. Households have to pay close to 45% of their income in housing. But in cities like Madrid and Barcelona, which rank amongst the highest in Europe in this rent burden, people have to pay around 74% of salaries from housing costs. So tenants just don't have anywhere to turn to, because social housing is really low. The percentage of social housing in Spain is amongst the lowest in Western Europe, just 2% of total stock. That's been one farm.
I mean, that's an extraordinary sum, isn't it, for renters to have to pay? What does it also mean, though, for owners of those properties? This surely sets up a quite significant clash.
Yeah, so it's really divided the market. So for owners, especially small landlords, the consequences can be really severe because the properties are occupied, but recovering them is it takes a long time. The process is really slow. It can take months, if not years, in courts. But during that time, they still have to pay the mortgage, taxes, community fees, but they don't receive the rent. So this has really pushed people to put the property in the market at really huge discounts, even 40% discounts. So it's just really polarized tenants.
Yeah, it's an extraordinary development that people would be forced to sell while this problem is ongoing as well. I mean, how does this fit into the broader housing crisis in Spain? And talk to us about what the government is doing about this.
The housing crisis has reached a boiling point. The government introduced temporary protections during the pandemic and the energy crisis, which we tend to protect tenants. It's called the social shield, and included suspensions of evictions for households that declare themselves economically vulnerable. Actually, now tomorrow, this is going to go up for vote again for an extension of another year. But while this was designed to prevent social exclusion, and the government is trying to balance both sides, owners just argue that the social burden has been shifted to them. It's just a vicious cycle in the supply side, because other owners that would probably put their property in the market for rent just sort of withdraw, and they see the risk of this loophole of people maybe squatting, and it tightens the supply, and there's less and less properties in the market to rent.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.